Getting those recommendations is really interesting.
Great. So this class was about change management. Why did you choose change management for the second class? Beryl?
Well, I didn't.
Okay.
I was just told to do it.
Okay. So that's a Ken class.
So that's a Ken question.
All right. Well, let me ask you this.
Ken said, I think you'd be the best person to talk about change management.
Great.
And then I chose to do it.
All right.
That was the
Tell me,
part.
what were you hoping that students would walk away with today when you talked about change management?
You know, it's really interesting because at the end of the class, I really wanted, and I think Caitlin and Carla will understand exactly where I was coming from, I really wanted to ask people how the discussion would influence their future practice. What did this mean for them? Because they heard an interesting case. But in general, the one thing that's constant, as everybody says to the point of cliche, is change. So everybody's going to be managing change. And that would be what I had hoped people would get, is a solid case study of a very dramatic change, but with some underlying principles that could be applied to the work of participants in whatever social change organization they find themselves.
Peter, what were you hoping people would walk away with today?
Well, both the framework that Ms. can provide, which I think was really useful, and I'll take parts of it to think about my own work as well, but also the idea that change ain't always hard. I mean, sometimes it's just a natural part of the way we need to work as organizations. Again, I think as much about growth as about change, and I think it's something that we should all promote in the organizations that we're working in. One of the changes we talked about, though, was a forced change, and how do you deal best with a circumstance like that? And I like these courses. I like when we're looking at the students and somebody has their brow creased or said, no, this isn't clear. You know, because that helps me think through how I explain where we are as an organization. And it also means that people are really trying to grapple with, well, what is this real life example? How does it mesh with what we've heard as theory?
I imagine you saw a lot of brows furrowed in Solidarity versus Solidarity Plus. The students seemed to struggle. What do you think that was about?
Well, for one thing, it was preparation on my part. I think I could have signposted and labeled things a little bit more simply. But I think, you know, they're right to have furrowed brows because we have two working through this. You know, it's not obvious how you seek to learn something, you know, learn the things that will be exactly the most useful in persuading others to take a certain course. And to look over all the things that you know about your partner portfolio and say, which are the significant ones, and where are the patterns in that, and what are the trends, and what's changing, and where are my beliefs challenged? You know, that's not easy work. So I'm not surprised that people exposed to it for, 20 minutes would be saying, well, no, what is this, and how do you go about it?
Yeah, I just want to say something tell you something that happened last semester. We're so accustomed to talking to one another. I understood what you were talking about, with solidarity and Solidarity Plus. It took me about 30 seconds to get it, because I speak your language and you speak my language. And we have similar upbringings, as it were. Yeah. And it's no surprise that we understand one another. But we tend to be so insular that we can't really tell our story to external audiences. And last year, in one of the classes that I nominally teach, one of the students got up and drew a stick figure, and he labeled the stick figure Polly, and underneath it he wrote 5 years old. And he made us stand up and talk to Polly every time we had something to say. Figure out how you can get Polly to understand this.
Yeah, indeed.
And as you know, Bruner suggests that you can make any concept accessible to a 5-year-old if you really understand the concept. Yeah. So that was a great exercise. For me, it was really a paradigm shift. So what is Solidarity and Solidarity Plus for Polly?
Indeed. And, I think this helps us think through how we tell the story and how we express, what we're working on internally. So, yeah, I'll keep Polly in mind.
And interestingly, by the way, Kent's drawing is not actually my understanding of what is on the right there, the other, because there the implication of what he drew is that others would be part of scale-up. But in fact, others might be part of scale-up, but they might also reduce noise in the system, drag in the system through policies, funding allocations, and all kinds of other things that allow Firelight to have a greater impact at the CBO level.
I think that's right. That's right. Yeah, we tend to think of the thing that's at scale as the CBOs.
But not.
Yeah.
It wasn't about, it's not only about scale up, it's about sustainability. And the topic really was scale and sustainability, not just scale. But anyway, just.
Yeah, right, that exactly.
So I'm also curious about this idea of change being subversive.
Yeah.
What is it that you meant by that?
Okay, so what's a subversive? A subversive is somebody who tries to, in little or big ways, overthrow the existing order, right? And that's what Peter talked about. He and his colleagues in LA and everybody else, overthrew the existing order of being a grant maker with relatively low accountability and big hearts to being something far more complex, where big-heartedness wouldn't alone suffice. You've always been, I'm sure, smart about your grant making, but now you have to be smart about other kinds of investment. And as you get smarter and smarter about those other kinds of investment, it is possible to envision a day where your grant making as a percentage of total budget would decline significantly, and that would be an overthrow of the existing order of significant magnitude. So that's the subversive story.
You know, my take on that, when I think of subversive, I think of systems that don't want the change to happen. And I feel on the whole, Firelight, the whole organization from board through staff and partners has been accepting of this change. And so I'm able to think of it as change as a responsibility and change as a discipline for all of us. When I think about what we're trying to do externally, I definitely resonate with what Beryl said about subversive, because I know there are a lot of ideas and a lot of systems and a lot of prejudices that are arrayed against what we would like to happen. So you have to use levers, you have to think politically, you have to think tactically, and all of that plays into the change management that she was talking about.
And you talked about philanthropy having a responsibility to leverage.
Absolutely. You know, especially those who are relying on endowments and keeping 95% of their funds off the table so they can generate the 5% that they spend every year. You know, that with that setup comes responsibility, that you invest, or that you grant that $5 million really well. And I think not only that people get that much money, but society benefits much more than that. And I think all foundations should keep themselves to that discipline.
So would you say that you recognize the change that was coming within Firelight, and that's why it's not subversive internally, because the organization had sort of made this shift already?
I think, yeah, you know, in terms of the shift from foundation to public charity, the writing was on the wall. It was the right thing to do, even for people who would like to have stayed in the private foundation form. There wouldn't have been enough income to support what we were doing. There wouldn't have been enough income to keep the office open. So in a situation like that, I think it's quite clear what you need to do. And in fact, I think people were actually glad that I took the bull by the horns and said, this is what we're going to do, both board and staff. On the learning part, you know, it feels a little bit more optional to people. So, you know, you get more pushback, and you get more, shouldn't we be spending our money really just to help kids? And, you know, but that just kind of increases my resolve to say, let's show that this really increases the value of the resources that we have and can offer to kids. And, you know, the jury is out on that. You know, I think we put together a super structure for that, a framework, infrastructure, but we haven't delivered yet in terms of what we know and how we push it so that change happens in other funders' behavior. Keep tuned.
Absolutely keep tuned. I wanted to ask Kent one question, if I can bring you in here. Okay with you
I got
too?
talking to. I didn't wear the right thing.
Sorry.
You can take your necklace
It's
off.
not a
One
Hawaiian
question,
shirt.
I promise.
You can take the necklace off. That would.
I didn't wear my earrings though. So.
Well, there
Do you want me to
go.
take Peter out or add another chair? Doesn't matter. So, Kent, my question to you is, why change management for the second class?
Do you want the honest answer?
Yes.
The honest answer is when she was available. That's actually the honest answer.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
How do you think the students benefit from that?
From having change management in second place, or just change management in
Or having me
general?
available.
Or having-
That's true.
That was a joke.
Reverence.
Oh, the number of quips that are going through my head, but I can't say because I just took sexual harassment training. So
That's funny.
I'm sorry, so ask the question.
No, ask it again. No
I'll answer it
problem.
seriously.
How do you think students benefit from learning about change management?
The reason that when I first started talking with Peter and Zanelli about the whole structure of this class, and we tried to think of, and I came up to Santa Cruz and had that one meeting with you guys and sort of tried to think through from my angle, what was I hearing, and then what would be most sort of provocative in class. And from my own personal professional experience, the thing that in a classroom students don't get as much as they perhaps could or should is this idea that in an organization there are multiple moving pieces, that there's a lot of different change all going on at the same time. And the idea of the academy often is to break organizations down into disciplinary chunks, if you will. You have a human resources class, you have a finance class, and you break organizations into, and you teach best practices. There's nothing wrong with that. But anybody who works in organizations knows that when you get into an organization, it kind of turns mushy in terms of they all interact, they all interrelate, and as a leader and a manager, you have to make constant choices about which part of the change process are you going to prioritize and why, which are you going to kind of put on hold for a while, and then what is the personal sort of negotiations that have to go into that. And so the idea of doing change management up front, honestly, apart from the fact that Beryl was available, to get that holistic idea of change in an organization, and that leadership and that good management is about trying to balance multiple change processes all at the same time. It tied very well, actually, with the first class, where I'm looking at Firelight not as a single organization, but in the context of a field. And so gradually, little by little, what we're trying to do with students is get them gradually down a little bit of a funnel where they can get more and more precise on contextual issues or on content issues, right? So despite the fact that she was available, there actually is a kind of a flow and a logic to this. Now, what I would have liked to do is to have the governance slot closer to the front of the class, but we couldn't because of availability. So governance actually comes at the very end, but we'll make that work too by making it seem utterly logical to save governance until the very end.
Well,
But I think
change
that there's
it on-
actually a compelling case for
What
that.
would that be?
That if you look at the factors that most influence organizational performance, as opposed to legitimacy, governance is very low.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually true.
So,
Why is that?
because the role of governance is to set policy, but not necessarily to do. I mean, it's actually not to do.
Yeah, you want to keep them out of the affairs of the organization the best you
So,
can.
but doing leads to impact. Policy influences doing, but doing is what leads to impact. So I like your order.
Yeah, well, serendipitous.
There you are.
Thanks.
Thank you.